It started with a simple letter, a warning, a fine, for something as small as a barn door. But what they didn't know was that I had a plan to make them pay. It wasn't about the barn anymore. It was about revenge. And it would start with their $5 resort lake. All it took was one twist of a valve, and everything changed. But what happened next? Well, let's just say, they never saw it coming. Welcome back, guys. I'm Mark, and you're here with me on HOA Unit, where I share stories that'll have you questioning everything you thought you knew about homeowners associations. I live out here in your location, and trust me, life here can get pretty wild. Now, I'm going to take you through the crazy story of how I flipped the script on the HOA and drained their precious $5 lake. It started off so normal. The HOA meeting, the same faces, the same voices. Every month, they'd gather like clockwork, discussing the rules we all had to follow. Lawn height, mailbox colors, acceptable fence designs. The usual stuff that no one cared about. Except them. But then there was her, the HOA president. Her smile was always the same, but there was something behind it. Something that didn't quite sit right. You could see it in her eyes, how cold they were, how calculated, like she was just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I had been living in this neighborhood for years. It wasn't perfect, but it was home. Sure, we had our small problems. Neighbors complaining about lawns not being just right, the usual petty things. But I never thought the HOA would actually come for me. I always thought I was safe, you know? Just another guy in the neighborhood minding my business. Not one of their targets, but that's exactly what they wanted, to control everything. One day, I received my first letter. It wasn't a warning, at least not in the way I thought. It was a fine, for a small crack in the fence. A fence that had been standing for years without any issues. The letter felt like a slap in the face. I'd paid my dues, followed the rules, but this felt personal. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe they were just trying to cover their backs. But then came the next letter. This time, it wasn't about the fence. It was about my barn. The barn I'd worked so hard to build. The barn that had been there for longer than most of the houses in the neighborhood. The barn they now said was a violation. Apparently, it didn't meet the HOA-approved aesthetic standards. I stood there reading the letter in disbelief. What did they mean by aesthetic standards? The barn had always been a part of my property. It wasn't hurting anyone. It was my space, my property, my life. But in their eyes, it wasn't good enough. I felt the familiar rage bubbling up inside me. How dare they? How dare they try to tell me what I can and can't do on my own land? I wasn't the only one getting these letters, though. No, everyone was starting to feel the heat. Neighbors I'd never talked to were coming up to me, shaking their heads, sharing their own stories. One guy had to repaint his mailbox because it was an inch off the approved height. Another neighbor was fined for planting the wrong type of flowers. It was all so ridiculous. The rules were getting stricter, and I was getting fed up. But there was something deeper in all of this. I could sense it, even though no one would say it out loud. It wasn't just about the barn or the fence or the flowers. It was about control. The HOA wasn't just trying to keep the neighborhood nice. They were trying to dominate everything, from the color of your mailbox to the height of your grass. They wanted us all to be little robots, following every order without question. I wasn't the type to back down easily. I wasn't going to let some petty HOA president push me around. But at the same time, I had to be smart about it. I couldn't just go charging in with all guns blazing. No, I needed to think carefully. Every move had to be precise. I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. This was going to be a battle, and I had to be ready. So what did I do? I played their game. I played by their rules, at least on the surface. I started following every single rule they laid out, down to the letter. I painted my mailbox, mowed the lawn every single week, even repainted my barn door. The things that used to feel like freedom now felt like a prison. But while I was following their ridiculous rules, something else was brewing. A plan. A plan that would make them regret crossing me. It was a plan that didn't involve breaking any laws. It involved taking their precious power away from them. I didn't know it yet, but this small, quiet neighborhood was about to explode, and all it would take was a single twist of a valve. But here's the real question. How far would they go to crush me? And what would I do to make them pay? The thing is, it wasn't just the barn. It wasn't even about the rules or the fines anymore. It was about feeling trapped, feeling like I was slowly losing the last bit of freedom I had, and I couldn't stand it anymore. Every morning I'd wake up to the sound of the lawnmower buzzing across the street. The same guy cutting his grass in perfect lines, exactly the way the HOA wanted. Every weekend the neighborhood would look the same. Perfect. And then there was my barn, the one thing I had left. It wasn't grand or expensive, just a small structure at the edge of my property. But to me, it was everything. I spent countless hours fixing it up, repairing the roof, painting it, adding a small garden outside. It was where I could escape when the world got too noisy. It was my sanctuary. But they didn't see it that way. They saw it as a blemish, something out of place in their perfect little world. One day I came home to find another letter. This one was worse. This one had a deadline. They told me to either tear it down or face even bigger fines. I stared at that letter, my heart pounding. I couldn't believe it. Tear it down? It was my property, my barn. I wasn't going to let them win. But I didn't know what to do yet. I couldn't just ignore them, but I couldn't tear it down either. So I thought about it, and thought about it some more. I spent the next few days pacing around my house, thinking. I had to find a way to fight back, a way to make them feel the same helplessness I felt. That's when I remembered the lake. The big, beautiful $5 million lake that the HOA was so proud of. The one that they flaunted every chance they got. The one that had the power to make them feel untouchable. But what if I could take that power away from them? What if I could drain the lake? Not destroy it, just drain it. Watch it slowly lose its water day by day. And when they noticed, it would be too late. Their precious lake would be gone, and they wouldn't even know who did it. It was perfect. I knew exactly how to do it. I'd seen the maintenance crew working on it before. They had these big control valves. I knew exactly where they were, hidden under the ground, near the back of the lake. No one would miss one twist, right? Just one small turn, and the water would begin to drain. I'd watched the lake for weeks, and it had always been full, a symbol of their power. What would happen if it wasn't full anymore? I spent the next few days planning. It was going to be tricky, but I had to act fast. If they found out, it would be a disaster. But if I did it right, they'd never be able to trace it back to me. Then came the night. The perfect night. The kind of night where everything seemed to align. No one was around. The streets were quiet, and the moon was high above. I grabbed my flashlight, my jacket, and headed out. I walked down my driveway, past the houses of my neighbors. No one was out. It felt almost too easy, like they were all asleep, unaware of the storm that was coming. I made it to the back of the lake, where the maintenance access was. There was a small, nondescript door leading into the underground control room. I had been here before, a long time ago, when the maintenance guys were doing some work. They had left the door unlocked once. It was the perfect opportunity. I slipped inside, keeping low. The room was dim, filled with pipes, gauges, and big metal valves. I knew exactly where to go. The main control valve. I could hear the faint sound of water flowing through the pipes. It was like the lake was alive. But I was about to change that. My hands shook as I gripped the valve. I turned it slowly, just a little at first. I didn't want to cause a flood, just a slow drain. A subtle, quiet revenge. I kept turning it. And then I heard it. The soft sound of water starting to trickle away. It was working. It was happening. I couldn't help but smile. Just a little. And then I froze. I heard something. Footsteps. Someone was coming. I turned off the valve, my heart racing. I ducked behind a large pipe and waited. The footsteps grew louder. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't see me. The door opened, and I could hear a voice. "Hey, what are you doing here?" My blood ran cold. Was I caught? Had someone seen me? I stood as still as possible, my heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps stopped just inches away from where I was hiding. I wanted to scream, but I didn't make a sound. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps retreated. The door closed again. I exhaled, relief flooding my body. I'd gotten lucky this time, but I knew I couldn't wait too long. I had to get out of there before anyone came back. I quickly left the room, shutting the door behind me. I walked back to my house, my steps quick but quiet, and the whole time I couldn't help but smile. The lake was already starting to lose water, and no one knew it yet. But here's the question. What would the HOA do when they found out? Would they figure out what happened, or would they think it was a simple malfunction? The day after I turned the valve, I woke up with a feeling of dread. It wasn't a bad feeling, not exactly. It was more like waiting for the inevitable. You know something's coming, you just don't know when. I had turned the valve. I had started the chain of events that would forever change this quiet little neighborhood, and I couldn't undo it now. I didn't know if I should be proud of myself or terrified. I had spent the whole night tossing and turning, wondering what they would do next. Would they find out? How long would it take them to notice the lake was draining? Would the HOA start blaming everyone for something that was so obviously their own fault? I couldn't help but laugh a little. It was funny in a twisted way. I had been forced into this. But now, I was the one holding the cards. It felt empowering. The phone rang just before lunch. It was a call from an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat, but I answered anyway. "Hello, is this Mr. Ghaffar?" the voice on the other end asked. It was a man's voice, stern, but with a hint of panic in it. "Yes, this is him," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Mr. Ghaffar, this is the HOA office. We have a situation. The lake. It's losing water. Fast. We've got maintenance crews on site, but something doesn't seem right." My stomach dropped. "Something doesn't seem right? What do you mean?" I asked, my voice steady. The man hesitated for a moment. "We don't know what happened yet, but the valve, it's been tampered with, and we don't know who did it." I nearly choked on my own words, pretending to sound confused. "What do you mean, tampered with? I don't even know anything about the valve." The man's voice got a little more intense. "We're investigating right now, but we need to know if you noticed anything unusual around the lake recently. Have you seen anything strange?" At this point, I was trying to hold in my laughter. I almost wanted to ask him, "What are you going to do? Throw me in HOA prison?" But instead, I kept my cool. "No, nothing unusual. Everything's been fine. Just the usual routine." I could hear him scribbling something down on his end. "All right, Mr. Ghaffar. If you see anything, let us know immediately." "Of course," I said, and hung up. I put the phone down and leaned back in my chair, a grin spreading across my face. They were already on it. They were already scrambling. They had no idea who was behind it, and I wasn't going to tell them. The next few days felt like one long waiting game. I watched from my window as the maintenance crews worked around the lake, constantly checking the water levels. Every now and then, I'd see the HOA president storming around, directing people, looking angry and frustrated. It felt almost surreal. Here they were, trying to fix something they had no control over. And all I had to do was stand back and watch it unfold. But even as I watched them run around like chickens with their heads cut off, I knew it wouldn't last. This couldn't go on forever. Sooner or later, they would realize they were in way over their heads. And when that day came, I needed to be ready. I had to stay calm, stay collected. They were already looking at me, but I couldn't show them my cards just yet. I had to play it cool. But then, that phone call came again. It was from the HOA president herself. I knew this wouldn't be good. She was angry. That much was clear from the tone of her voice. "Mr. Ghaffar," she said, "we need to speak to you in person. This situation is getting out of hand." I could hear the frustration in her voice. She was barely keeping it together. I knew I was starting to get under her skin. "Sure, I'm available," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "We'll be at your house in 20 minutes, she snapped. The phone call ended abruptly, and I was left standing there, grinning to myself. I had them exactly where I wanted them. But as I thought about it, I realized that this could be the turning point. If I played my cards right, I could force their hand. I could make them crack. Or better yet, I could expose them for the frauds they were. 20 minutes later, they arrived. The president, flanked by 2 other board members, stepped onto my front porch. The president didn't even greet me. She went straight to the point. "Mr. Ghaffar, you need to tell us exactly what you've done. We know the lake is draining, and we know it's not a malfunction." I could feel her eyes drilling into me. It was almost like she was waiting for me to break. But I didn't. I stayed calm. I stayed collected. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, holding my ground. "You don't know?" she scoffed. "Mr. Ghaffar, the lake is our responsibility, and if you've done anything to harm it, you will pay for it." I could see the anger in her eyes, but I didn't flinch. "I haven't done anything," I said. "I'm just here, minding my own business. If there's a problem with it, E-Lake, you should look into it, but don't come here accusing me of things." The tension in the air was so thick I could almost feel it, but they had no proof that I was the one who had twisted the valve. They had nothing to hold over me. Yet, as they turned to leave, the president gave me one last glare. "You're not off the hook yet," she warned. And I knew. This was far from over. But here's the question. How long before the HOA realizes the truth? And what will they do when they find out it was me all along? It's funny, you know, how one small action can set everything in motion. I had no idea how big this was going to get. When I twisted that valve, it felt like a harmless little act of defiance. But now, it was spiraling into something far bigger than I could have imagined. The HOA was furious, but they had no clue who was behind it. And that was the best part. I was untouchable. But the fear, the thrill, it didn't last long. Every day, the tension grew thicker, heavier. The water levels were dropping, and I could see the HOA scrambling. I could almost feel their desperation through the walls of my house, and I was just sitting there, watching it all unfold. But I knew. I couldn't keep watching from the sidelines forever. Sooner or later, Something bigger was going to happen. I could feel it. Things were about to get out of hand. I couldn't just let them keep looking at me like I was some innocent bystander. They had come to my house, confronted me. They wanted answers, but I wasn't giving them any. I played my part perfectly. I didn't panic, didn't give any hints, just stood there, acting like I was clueless. But the truth was, I wasn't scared anymore. I had already made my choice, and now I was going to make them feel what it was like to lose control. Days passed, and the lake was still slowly draining. Every morning, I'd peek out my window to see maintenance crews at the water's edge. They were frantically working. They were digging, they were checking the pipes, trying to figure out where the water was going. But they were looking in all the wrong places. They couldn't figure it out because they had no idea who was behind it. And that was exactly how I wanted it. They were wasting their time, their energy, while I was living my life, quietly watching it all. They had no idea that all it took was one small twist. And everything they loved, everything they thought was untouchable, was slipping away. But one day, as I was sipping coffee and watching the chaos unfold, I noticed something strange. The HOA president, the one who had come to my house a few days ago, was standing at the edge of the lake. She looked different. I could see the frustration and anger written all over her face. She was standing there, arms crossed, her eyes scanning the water like she could will it to stop draining. But no matter how hard she looked, nothing changed. The lake kept losing water, slowly but surely. Something about her expression caught my attention. She wasn't just angry anymore. She was worried. Worried about losing control. She had been the one to flaunt the HOA's power, the one who thought she could dictate everything in the neighborhood. But now, she was standing there, looking like she had no idea what to do. Like she was watching everything she built crumble. I smiled to myself. That was the beauty of it all. She had no idea that the power she thought she had was slipping away. And it was slipping away because of me. The thought was almost too sweet to resist. But I couldn't get complacent. I couldn't stop now. I had to keep the pressure on. I had to keep them on their toes. But then came the phone call. It was late at night, just after midnight. I had just gone to bed when the phone rang, shattering the silence. I picked up the receipt. Ivor, my heart beating fast. It was the HOA president again. Her voice was low, almost frantic. "Mr. Ghaffar, we need to talk," she said. I could hear the edge in her voice. She wasn't just angry now, she was scared, and I liked it. "I'm listening," I said, trying to sound casual. "You've been causing us a lot of trouble," she said, her voice shaking just a little. I could hear her breathing heavily, almost like she was struggling to stay composed. "Stop pretending like you don't know what I'm talking about. This whole thing with the lake, it's your fault, isn't it?" I paused, letting the silence drag on. "Look, I don't know what you're talking about," I said, trying to sound as innocent as possible. She wasn't buying it. "I know it's you, Mr. Ghaffar. I don't know how you did it, but you're the one behind all of this." Her voice was rising now, but I kept my cool. "I don't know what you're accusing me of," I said, my voice even, "but I assure you, I've had nothing to do with it." The tension on the other end of the line was palpable. She was holding back now, trying to get under my skin. But it wasn't going to work. I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to let her have the upper hand. She kept pushing, though. She kept accusing me, demanding answers. But I didn't give in. I stayed calm, collected, knowing that the more she pressed, the more it would eat at her. I didn't say much more after that. She kept talking, but I just listened. Her voice was shaking by the end of the call, and when she hung up, I couldn't help but smile. The cracks were starting to show. She was losing control, and it was beautiful. But the next day, I saw her again. This time, she wasn't alone. She had a team of lawyers with her. They were standing at the edge of the lake, pointing and gesturing like they were ready to take action. But I knew better. I knew they were bluffing. They didn't have anything on me. But it was coming. I could feel the storm building, and I was ready for it. I woke up to the sound of sirens, not just one, but several. I could hear them echoing in the distance, growing louder and louder. I got out of bed, still groggy from the restless night, and walked to the window. I saw the flashing lights, the police cars parked along the street. And I knew. This was it. The storm had finally come. I couldn't help but feel a rush of adrenaline. This wasn't just some petty HOA issue anymore. This was real. The lake was draining faster now, and they were getting desperate. I had made my move, and now the consequences were unfolding. I dressed quickly, pulling on my jacket and stepping outside. The neighborhood, which had been so quiet and peaceful just days ago, was now filled with tension. The usual morning routine had been replaced with chaos. Neighbors were outside, watching the police and the maintenance crews rush around, trying to figure out what was going on. And the HOA president, she was standing there, flanked by 2 police officers, gesturing wildly as they looked at the lake. She was frantic. The power was slipping from her hands, and she didn't know how to get it back. I walked slowly toward the group, trying to blend in with the crowd. I knew if I stayed too close to them, they'd suspect something. I needed to keep my distance, but I also needed to see what was happening. I needed to know what they were planning to do. From where I was standing, I could hear the president yelling at the police. "You don't understand," she was saying. "This lake is everything. It's not just water. This is our pride, our investment. If it's damaged, it could cost us millions." I had to suppress a laugh. She didn't know the half of it. I had taken more than just water away from her. I had taken away her sense of control. I moved a little closer, just enough to hear the officers tell King. They were discussing the situation, trying to figure out how to stop the lake from draining completely. I could see the panic on their faces. They were looking at each other, as if they were waiting for someone to take charge. But no one had any answers. And that was when I realized they were helpless. The HOA had built its empire on control, on manipulating everyone in the neighborhood, from the mailbox height to the paint on your fence. But now they couldn't fix something that had been broken by their own arrogance. And it was starting to show. The police had no idea how to stop the lake from draining. The maintenance crews were fumbling around, looking for something to fix. And the HOA president, she was standing there, helpless, staring at the water as it continued to flow away. I couldn't stop myself from smiling. This was exactly what I had wanted. It was perfect. But as much as I wanted to revel in the moment, I knew this wasn't the end. No, this was just the beginning. The HOA was going to come after me no matter what, and when they did, I needed to be ready. Later that day, I received a letter in the mail. It was from the HOA. I could feel my heart racing as I ripped it open. They were finally taking action. The letter was filled with legal jargon, threats of lawsuits, and warnings about how I was about to face serious consequences for my actions. I read through it quickly, barely able to believe what I was seeing. They were demanding that I pay for the damages to the lake, including all repairs, lost revenue, and fines. They were coming after me for everything. I couldn't help but chuckle. They didn't get it, did they? They thought they could intimidate me with their legal threats, but I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not after everything I had put into this. The letter warned that I had 48 hours to respond or face legal action. It was their final warning. They wanted me to come clean and admit what I had done. But I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction. They had underestimated me from the start, and now they were going to learn what happens when you mess with the wrong person. I spent the rest of the day making preparations. I knew the HOA would escalate this. They'd do everything in their power to get me to admit guilt, to force me into submission. But I wasn't going to fall for it. No, I had something bigger planned. I wasn't going to let them intimidate me. I was going to take this fight all the way to the top, and when I was done, they'd be the ones apologizing. The next morning, I made my move. I called a lawyer, someone who could help me fight back. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me, not anymore. I was going to fight back with everything I had. By the time the HOA president called me again, I was ready. Her voice was laced with panic. She demanded to know why I hadn't responded to their letter. She threatened legal action again, but this time I wasn't afraid. I was calm, composed, and I told her exactly what I was going to do. "I'm not paying for any of this," I said. "You want to fight me? Fine, but I'm not backing down." She went silent on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, trying to figure out what to say next. But I wasn't giving her a chance. I hung up the phone, knowing I had just thrown the first punch in what was going to be a long, hard battle. I knew the moment I hung up the phone that things were about to get a whole lot more complicated. The HOA wasn't the type to back down, not now, not when their precious lake was at risk and their authority was being questioned. I could already feel the storm building. It was like waiting for thunder before the lightning strikes. You knew it was coming, but you didn't know when. The very next day, I got a visit. It wasn't a knock on the door. No, this time they didn't even bother with that. I looked out my window to see the HOA president, flanked by 2 lawyers, walking up my driveway. Their faces were stone-cold serious, and they weren't here to chat. I walked out the front door, not even pretending to be surprised. They had been coming for me for days now, so I knew this moment would come sooner or later. The president was fuming. Her jaw clenched tight, her eyes narrowed. "You think you can get away with this, don't you?" she spat, her voice dripping with venom. I stayed calm. "Get away with what?" I asked innocently. "The lake," she said, her voice rising. "You drained our lake. You've caused us millions in damages." I didn't even flinch. "That's not true," I said coolly. "You don't know that for sure. I'm just a homeowner. I don't know anything about valves or lakes." Her eyes flared with anger. She wasn't buying it, but she didn't have any proof. She had nothing on me. "We'll see about that," she hissed. And then the lawyers stepped forward. They handed me another letter. This one was even worse than the last. It was a demand for payment, with threats of a lawsuit if I didn't settle the matter within the next 48 hours. This wasn't just about the lake anymore. No, this was personal now. They wanted me to pay for everything, the damages, the lost revenue, and even the legal fees they were piling up. They wanted me to cave, to admit guilt, and pay for something I hadn't even done. And they thought that threatening me would make me fold. But here's the thing about threats. They don't work on me. I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to give in. I wasn't going to let them push me around. I had been playing nice, keeping my distance, but now, I was ready to turn this into something they'd never forget. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me. I wasn't going to back down, not when I was this close to winning. As the lawyers handed me the letter, I could see the arrogance in their eyes. They thought they had me cornered, but what they didn't realize was that I had been planning for this moment for weeks. I had already talked to my lawyer, I had already made my move, and I wasn't afraid of their threats. So what did I do next? I called my lawyer, the one who had been helping me stay calm through all of this. He was just as determined as I was. We weren't going to let these people bully us. I was ready for this fight, and I knew we were going to win. My lawyer told me exactly what to do. He said we needed to send a counterclaim, one that would put the HOA on the defensive. If they wanted to go to court, we would go to court. But this time, the tables would be turned. It wasn't just about the lake anymore. This was about their power, their manipulation, their control. And I was going to make sure they understood that I wasn't just a homeowner they could trample over. The next day, we filed the counterclaim. I knew it was going to hit them like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just a legal move, it was a message. I wasn't afraid of them anymore. I wasn't afraid of their threats, and I wasn't going to sit back and let them destroy everything I had worked for. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. I felt like I was finally taking control of my life. It didn't matter how much money they had, how much power they thought they had. What mattered now was that they couldn't silence me, and as long as I had my lawyer, my strategy, and the truth on my side, I wasn't going to back down. The HOA president didn't know what to do next. She was furious, of course, but she couldn't do anything without evidence. She didn't have anything concrete to accuse me of, nothing that would stick, and now that we had filed our counterclaim, the ball was in their court. I could see the confusion on her face when she got the news. She had expected me to fold, to give in to their demands, but now she was the one on the defensive. She wasn't just looking at me anymore. She was looking at the legal system, at the fight we were about to take to the courtroom. But as the days went by, I could see the frustration building in the HOA. The pressure was mounting, and I was just sitting back, watching it all unfold. For the first time, I felt like I had the upper hand. Now the question is, will the HOA back down? Or will they double down on their threats and try to take me to court? What do you think will happen next? The days after we filed the counterclaim were filled with tension. The kind of tension that clings to the air, thick and heavy, making every breath feel like a struggle. I could feel it every time I stepped outside. The HOA wasn't just angry anymore. They were desperate. They were scrambling, trying to find something, anything that could turn the tide in their favor. But I had already seen the cracks in their armor, and I was watching it all slowly crumble before me. I didn't know how long this battle would last, but I knew one thing for sure. It wasn't just about the lake anymore. It was about control, and the HOA had underestimated me from the start. A week passed, then two. Each day, I got updates from my lawyer. The HOA was trying to rally support, but it was clear they were running out of options. Their perfect neighborhood was no longer the safe, pristine place they had built their empire on. It was now a battlefield, and they were on the losing side. The president had become more erratic, her public speeches growing more frantic. She would show up at town meetings, shouting about how I had attacked their legacy. But the crowd was starting to lose interest. People were starting to see the truth. They were tired of being controlled. They didn't care about a drained lake anymore. They cared about what was happening to their lives. The HOA's grip was slipping, and I was right there, in the center of it all, watching it unfold. Then came the phone call. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping my coffee, when my phone buzzed. It was from my lawyer. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mr. Ghaffar, we've got them," he said, his voice tight with excitement. "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart racing. "They're offering to settle. They want to drop the lawsuit, all the fines, everything. But they want something from you." I sat up straight. What could they possibly want from me now? "Tell me more," I said, trying to keep my cool. "They want a public apology," he replied. "They want you to admit you drained the lake and apologize publicly for the damage you caused." I laughed. "Are they out of their minds?" I said, shaking my head. "You're not going to accept that, are you?" "No," my lawyer said, his voice firm. "That's not going to happen." I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of it all settle in. The HOA was cornered. They had no choice but to try and save face. But they had underestimated me once again. I didn't respond to the settlement offer right away. Instead, I took a day to think about it. I knew this wasn't just a decision about money or the lake anymore. It was about principle. It was about standing up to the people who thought they could control us all, make us bow down to their rules, and I wasn't going to let them win. The next morning, I stood outside looking at my property. The barn still stood strong, the grass in my yard as wild as ever. The house was quiet. But I could feel the energy shifting. I was tired of running from the HOA's demands. I was tired of feeling like I didn't have a voice. And I was done playing their game. They had wanted power. But now it was mine. I called my lawyer. "I'm rejecting their offer," I said. "We're going all the way." He didn't hesitate. "I've got your back," he said. "Let's finish this." I knew this was going to get messy. The HOA would stop at nothing to save their reputation, their lake, their control. But they were running out of time. The longer this dragged on, the more people were starting to wake up. The more people were seeing through their facade. And when we went to court, we were going to expose them for what they truly were, a group of people trying to hold on to their power by exploiting the neighbors they were supposed to serve. It was going to be the final blow, and I couldn't wait. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, paperwork, and strategy. But as the date for the court hearing drew closer, the HOA started to panic. They knew they were losing. They started calling for settlements again, but now it wasn't just about the lake. It was about everything they had done. Their reign of control was coming to an end, and when it did, it was going to be devastating. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I walked outside, stood on my porch, and looked at the neighborhood. It looked peaceful, but I knew better. I had fought to make it this way. I had fought for my freedom, for my rights. And tomorrow, I was going to finish this. Tomorrow, the HOA would see what happens when they try to destroy someone who refuses to back down. Tomorrow, it was game over. The morning of the hearing, I arrived early. My lawyer was already there, briefcase in hand, ready to take on whatever came our way. The courtroom was filled with tension, the air thick with anticipation. I could see the HOA president sitting across from me. Her face pale, her hands shaking. She knew this was it. She knew that she had lost control, and I wasn't going to let her walk away with anything. The judge called the court to order, and everything went silent. This was it, the final chapter in the HOA's reign of terror, and I was ready to make my move.